It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Welcome in, Take Command Podcast, post-game edition. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulsen with you. Commanders go down at the buzzer in Seattle, 29-26. If there's one thing for me to be happy about, Logan, it's that I predicted it would be a 3-point Seattle win. As people might be able to tell from the sound of my voice, that is not or the tenor of my voice, that is not bringing me a whole lot of joy. There's a lot to talk about from this game. We'll do our best in about 30 minutes here, and then obviously we'll dive deep into the tape coming up on Tuesday morning. That podcast will be out Tuesday afternoon / Wednesday morning, depending on if you're talking about audio or video. But Logan, I'm just going to leave it open-ended. Final whistle blows. You've already done post-game on the team site with their stuff. Where does your mind go with this one? Because there's plenty of areas to be frustrated, plenty of areas probably to look at and be like, hey, they actually did a good job in that thing. But why do they lose the game ultimately?
So it's interesting. When I watch these games and when I compare them to what we watched last year, we've talked a lot of football, me and you, over the last 3 years. And I think one of the things that is nice for me on some level is that this team is a competitive football team. They're in every game, and they're not in a game where it's they get a late score and they're still down by 7. They get a late score and they're in the game. And so I know that's not exactly, lighting people's hair on fire, but I think this is a more competitive product week in and week out than it has been the last couple of years. Now, that's not super exciting, but I think that there is some validity to that. And I think ultimately, what I try to empathize with from a fan standpoint is why don't they come out the other end of these games with a win? Right. And so I just try to look at it high level right after the game. And the thing that comes to me is I think defensively, I know they gave up 498 yards of total offense. And I know that that's a huge number. But I also feel when you look at the box score, when you look at kind of the game flow, what sticks out to me is that I thought they played well enough to win, which is going to sound insane. And I know that sounds crazy, but
when you lose by 3, by definition, you're kind of in it. So there's that.
But I thought they did enough. I think what was the third down percentage for?
They're 4. Seattle was only 4 of 14 on third down.
Yeah, 4 of 14, which is what you needed to do. I felt like the really big deciding factor for the defense, quite honestly, was that explosive play to Walker. That was the turning point in the game. And we talked about it a lot. And I was just going through my notes after the game, and the first field goal they have is there's a 19-yard completion to DK Metcalf, right? Prior to that, there's a 16-yard completion. So they got these 2 explosive chunks. Get them down for field goals, right? And both those come on first down. It's not it's third and whatever. It's the first down efficiency for them was big. And that's what we talked about on the pregame show, was just managing their explosive plays. And I think on the whole, you look at it and you say they did a pretty good job of managing explosives until the Walker run. And then there's that drive. There's the last drive of the game for Seattle where Lockett has a 20-yard completion, which is an explosive play, which leads to points. And then there's that sequence of penalties by Benjamin St-Juste. And it was Benjamin St-Juste holding, and then there was an illegal something on the field. There was a sequence of penalties.
They had 12 in the huddle, yeah.
Right. So I look at it and I say, man, that's pretty frustrating. So then why did the defense give up so many points having played kind of a competitive down? And we could talk about St-Juste and Fuller and how the Seattle receivers kind of got after what I would say kind of got after our DBs. But ultimately, they were in competitive positions. There weren't any big coverage busts outside of the one Walker play, which is kind of what we were calling for. And I think both of us kind of fundamentally understand at this point that they're not like a world-beating defense. They can be a solid defense.
Correct.
And I thought there were shades of solid defense today, minus 3 or 4 plays. And even after the fumble, even after Sam's fumble, they forced Seattle to go 3 and out there, and they get 0 points. So They did some big boy stuff this game. So for me, what's the difference? And I say offensively, there was probably, I think that was, let me think if I can remember, it was probably 5 or 6 drives where it's either ending in a punt or a field goal where they could have just put a stranglehold on this game. And they just didn't do it. And I'm an offensively biased person. I'm an offensive player. I'm an offensive coach. I look at it through an offensive lens, and I'm sorry. But I say if they wanted to win this game, they could have taken hold of this game more demonstratively early and said, we're going to sustain drives. We're going to get first downs. We're going to score touchdowns, not field goals, and put this thing in the bag. And that's probably confusing and somewhat confounding for fans to hear, but that's how I look at it. I thought that to me is the difference, because I think ultimately Seattle runs 15 more offensive plays than the Commanders, which is a significant amount of plays.
That's 13 more, but close
13
enough.
more.
74-61, the
Right.
final tally.
Which is a significant amount of offensive plays.
Yes.
Like that's a drive, that could be 2 drives depending on how many explosives are in there. So I look at that, I'm like, that's where the discrepancy lies for me. And that's where you offensively have not held up your end of the bargain. Because that number, even in bad games, should be pretty close offensively. It's 68, 67, 65. And obviously that's not the case. So to me that's the deciding factor. And I know that's not exactly the most exciting thing to hear of all time.
No, and fans are going to be upset, and I'm going to quell some of their upsetness here for a moment, because I'm going to make us focus on the defense for a second and make a few points. But I will say, before we do that, by and large, I agree with you, because that second and third quarter offensively is not good enough for where this team has been operating. And you don't even have to score. Like, you just have to possess the ball a little bit more and play a little bit better field position. But we'll circle back to the offense in a moment. To me, as I've kind of come to grips with this defense, and now we're at a point where we can't be like, whoa, they're only early in the season, we have to see what they do. Like, we know what they are, and that what they are is deficient in certain spots from a personnel standpoint. And that's why I think sometimes we wind up talking more offenses. We just accept the defense for what they are and who they are. I even thought Jack did a good job making adjustments in the game. Like, I loved that they started bringing pressure, and people are like, Del Rio sucks. Why don't we talk about him instead of talking about EB's play calling? It's like, because I thought Del Rio actually did a pretty good job today. The problem is his guys can't play, at least well enough to beat a team like Seattle on a day like today. And it's not that they're terrible football players, but I think that this team does not have guys on that side of the ball who finish plays, and specifically in the secondary. And it's why they drafted Forbes, and that call to eject him is hellacious. I used a different word on Twitter, but I won't say that word here. That way William doesn't have to bleep stuff. But that was terrible. It's 100% a penalty. Ejecting him for that is an absolute joke. So you lose him, which obviously affects a lot of stuff. But ultimately, like, Benjamin St-Juste has now for years on end been the same guy who's in position and can't finish a play. I think also another problem for them today is there's no turnovers forced. And you want to get off the field, you got to force some, and they don't. And, in big spots, there's a lack of attention to detail. Seattle gets 4 first downs from penalties on Washington in this game. Like, that is how you lose football games defensively. And so, yes, they have some players that are very, very good. Absolutely. But there is a lack of attention to detail and an inability to finish plays that has plagued this defense, not just this year, but to an extent for 4 years. And that is going to be ultimately why you're probably going to have a new defensive staff next year. And I don't say that like, oh, hooray, cool, firing people. Like, these are human beings. But, like, realistically, the way that the data is trending, you don't get to be one of the worst point production defenses in the NFL and continue forward. That is the nature of this league, unfortunately. And I think if they could help themselves out with finishing plays, creating turnovers, making sure that you don't get on the wrong end of yet another poster, having DK Metcalf do your lockdown celebration in your face on consecutive, like, 3rd, 4th down type of situations, that's how you win in this league. And unfortunately, I just don't think, and like, I'll even add another one, right? Like, Percy Butler. Percy's a fantastic athlete. He's been great on teams for them for the last couple of years. He's fine in a spot as a 3rd rotational safety. But when he's out there playing starters minutes, like, you see some of the deficiencies. You see why he was a later round pick despite that athleticism. The missed tackle on the Walker play, like, that's Percy's tackle to make. And that's the second straight week they've given up a 64-yard touchdown to an opposing running back on something that Percy Butler, while others in front of him made mistakes to let it get there, which is an important thing to point out, ultimately is the last line of defense and can't finish the play. And I think that's the theme defensively, where schematically, like, you actually go hats off to the coaches. These guys are in good positions. They're there to make the plays. They got to make them. And at some point that's on the players. And I think, we've seen enough volume at this point to go, I don't know that these are the players that are going to do that. And it's up to them to prove us wrong and improve over the next 8 weeks or whatever, however many weeks we got left at this point, 7.
Yeah, and to be fair to Percy, obviously misses the tackle there. I thought this was one of his more consistent football games. Like he did
Yeah,
some stuff,
made some other plays.
some other stuff, and obviously, like I like to reserve kind of final judgment for the film breakdown. And you said something, and I think there's a lot of truth to it while we were kind of getting ready for this segment. With regards to St. Just, and I think St. Just is a good football player. I think he's in good position. I think he understands route concepts. Like all those things are really important. Like he draws the toughest matchup every single week for a reason. And you said, well, like he's probably not a true one, like a guy that can just sustain that over the course of the year. And I think when you look at how this team was built and the expectation, I think was probably that Forbes was going to be the true one and draw some more of those tougher matchups. And St. Just, then you say, oh, he can be the nickel and Fuller can be the other corner. And then all of a sudden the dynamic totally shifts. And, I think we're talking about St. Just and Fuller and Forbes in a much different way if they got the development from Forbes early. Now, that's not to be super critical of Forbes, but he hasn't developed the way that I think that they had hoped initially. And that's just an assumption. I haven't talked to anybody in the building about it.
For sure.
But I think that changes the dynamic of that group. And so for St. Just to kind of consistently draw these really, really, really tough matchups every week and then lead the league in pass breakups, like obviously there's a certain level of production there. But to your point, because he's in tight position, he always ends up on the poster. And like it's kind of a high leverage situation at the end of the game, and he gives up 2. And I'm sure he would tell you he's got to be better. And he's right there. He's in the pocket of the guy, and he gets the PI. I think is the other one that I would kind of call attention to, which is a little bit unfortunate because I feel like the timing of Geno Smith kind of disrupting his drop there disrupted St. Just's break on the ball, and it leads to a PI. So it's not.
He almost played it too well. Like that is
yeah.
unlucky, but like at the end of the day, he's there early, and
I'm not saying
what do you want him to do? It's like I don't know, but like it's PI. Like and if that happened to Terry, like we'd all be like, that's got to get called.
And I'm not saying that that's not a penalty. I'm just saying like it's a little bit. There is some context for that, and like you said, he's got to make the play ultimately, and I think he would tell you the same thing. I'm 100% positive. But I think that's where you kind of say, like, this is something we were concerned about coming into the game, is knowing that there was these 3 horsemen on the other side, these 3 horses who were kind of the most dynamic receiving group that they've seen since Philly. And they played like it. They played good football today. And I think that's got to be a point of frustration for the defense. And I think that's the other thing is, like, despite that, this is a competitive football game, and that's the tough thing I'm having a hard time reconciling here, because I feel like if the offense, like you said, had been a little bit more able to sustain drives, but on the field a little bit longer, possess the football a little bit better, and finish drives, I don't think this is even a conversation. I just think when you give an offense like that's that explosive and that dynamic more bites at the apple, like that's what happens when you have explosive playmakers. That's what happens when you get Walker touches a ton, is that he's going to make a play. DK Metcalf will make a play at some point if you give him more opportunities. And they gave this offense 15 more opportunities at the apple, or 13 more opportunities. Now that's a defense. They got to get off the field. But I feel like ultimately, Craig, and you can stop me if you disagree, they did. I mean, they did a good job on third down of making plays when they had to. And I don't know, it is a frustrating outcome. But I think what I kind of harken back to is that despite this being very frustrating for me and frustrating for fans, I think that this team there's a competitiveness here because of the quarterback that gets you excited.
Yes,
and
that is true.
He could have played better tonight. I'm sure he would tell you the same thing. They could have maybe called a better game, whatever that is. And that's something for the Tuesday pod to kind of break down what exactly is going on there. But I think the competitive nature of this team is something that I'm excited about. Like, they're in a game with Seattle, who last year I would have said no chance. And this year, like, well, Sam's playing good ball. Evie's calling good football games. Maybe there's a shot. And look, and lo and behold, despite kind of a poor offensive production for 2 quarters of this game, they're in it in the 4th quarter with a chance to win the football game.
Right. They still scored 26. Like,
yeah.
There's plenty there. I think, to wrap up the defense, one thing, by the way, that I'm curious to look at on tape, I feel like the game changed a little bit when James went out. I feel like they were kind of containing Seattle, doing a good job, and I think Obata had a rough one. I felt like there was multiple times where I was yelling at the TV, like, where are you going, bro? And some of those runs that get out and like some of that stuff, happened towards FA side. We'll see if that holds true on tape. Sometimes that's really hard to see. Often it's really hard to see on TV, but kind of a stick a pin in it. We'll come back to it Tuesday. But also, like, we're 94 and 93. Can those two get a dominant game this year? Like, that is what you're paying them for. That is how they played last year, and it just hasn't been. And maybe that's something we should dive deeper on a tape of, like, why have those two been so relatively to what they're capable of and what we saw previous years quiet this season. We can dive into that perhaps on Tuesday. Anything else on the defense? We kind of talked about Jack real quick, but I actually, we talked during the week, like, do you play soft shell coverage and try to be conservative, or do you heat Geno up? And I thought heating him up.
You did both.
Yeah, second half, they really, were like, screw this, we're heating him up. And I think they did a really good job. I think that was a great adjustment. And it shows you that you have some more tricks in your bag potentially moving forward. But ultimately, not enough. And I guess here would be my last thing on the defense. And this might be a much better Tuesday topic. And maybe even this is what we do take 5 on Tuesday morning. First thing that come out. That last 2-minute drive. Like, I know it's a tough spot, but, like, what are you doing there that field goal is what they got to get, and it just, there's no resistance. It felt like a foregone conclusion, and that's not good.
And it'll be interesting to look at that, because I think they had a pressure that they had brought twice in that game, and they had Cam Kroll as a free runner both times. And I felt like they brought that pressure for the third time right there, and they picked it up. And so then you get St. Juste in a spot where he's defending like essentially a post in a 0 situation with no underneath help. And that, again, like, I don't want to sound like I'm defending St. Juste, but in that situation,
that's a tough freaking spot.
That's a tough look. And he's there. He's in position, right? But it's...
And you want to force... Like, you want to keep outside leverage. You want to force that middle so they have to burn a timeout or the clock keeps running. Like, he plays it on the right side of it. It's just, like, it's a one-on-one drill with a two-way go. Like, if the pressure doesn't challenge the throw, like, that's a tough freaking
and I think that's the thing about that last play specifically. It's like that... I like the call. Maybe you went to the well one too many times with that pressure, and then you're putting your corner in a tough spot versus a good football player, a guy who's big and you can win one-on-one. And shoot, like, that's the result. And so, I thought another thing that showed up for me from the defense is the play action stuff. I thought Seattle did a really good job with that in terms of creating pockets. And I will say, I thought the rush, everyone's going to be all hot about Montez and Chase being gone and not getting any pressures, but I thought the rush has been actually comparable to when Chase and those guys were here.
It wasn't spectacular when they were here.
Yeah, and I think that they've been pretty consistent, and James has been creating pressure. I thought Casey had some nice pressures. I feel like when I watched John and Casey work together, they seem to be more on the same page, and you're getting a more dynamic and assertive John Allen. And obviously, like, we got to look at his production and see where he's at. But I think that's all good stuff. I thought Jamin Davis showed up big time today. In some spots. Obviously, the Tyler Lockett play is like right over his outstretched hands. I don't know how you play that really any better. Maybe you got to get deeper. Maybe when I watch the film, I'll be able to give you a better insight. But from a run standpoint, I thought he was very physical. He fit runs well. And, obviously that's just kind of high level stuff. He had 10 tackles. He's going to flash. And then Cam Curl, I thought, did a good job kind of being where they needed to be. But again, we'll see how that all looks on the all 22. But it's frustrating me because I do feel like this has been the most, is consistent the right word, Craig? This has been the best that they've played recently in terms of not allowing just those free runners down the middle of the field. And that's something that I wanted to see. So I saw it. So I'm kind of happy with it, because there's not coverage busts, right? But they still lose the football game, and it's still not good enough to win. So I think that's the thing where I'm kind of negotiating it as a fan of the team and someone who watches the team a lot, is like Jack called a pretty good game. I thought they were competitive for the majority of the game, and it wasn't good enough. And I just look back to that.
I think that's the conclusion, right? It's just, I don't think right now the players are good enough, which is not good for a side of the ball that you've invested much of your capital in over the course of your tenure. If you're Ron Rivera, that is reflective at this point, and is something that he's going to have to reconcile at the end of the season when he sits down with Josh Harris, and the future of the franchise is decided. On the offensive side of the football, what a like spectacularly frustrating game, because you see the potential of this offense. Man, when they are clicking, they look so good. And I think maybe we should have started here, just as like a point to make before we get into the defense stuff. Like, if the season truly is about, if we zoom all the way out and be like, how good is Sam Howell? And the most important thing is deciding if this dude's the guy. The meter is continually ticking towards he's the
Positive.
guy.
Yeah.
And he, again, showed the moxie, the arm talent, the clutch ability, the moment's never too big for him. Like, all of the stuff that you love about Sam Howell was present again in this game. The question is, what is missing to turn that into wins? And I think today, I certainly look at the play calling as kind of a complementary football thing that I think we should talk about. But before we even get to that, like, the best players on this team offensively are supposed to be the wide receivers, and they were totally and wholly absent today. And I know that is almost impossible to tell exactly why on TV versus on film with the All-22, but that seems like a large factor in their second and third quarter slogs in the middle of this game.
Yeah, and I think, there were obviously you're kind of going off a handful of plays, but you look at Terry's matchup with Tyreek Woolen, and Tyreek kind of, I think the length and the size there was a little bit of an issue for Terry and a little bit of issue for Sam, like just kind of working that relationship in terms of targets, right? Obviously, Tyreek Woolen on Jahan, I thought, that was a matchup I didn't love, but I think in the handful of clips that we did get to see, that was a matchup that definitely favored Tyreek. I thought Witherspoon was dynamic and athletic and physical and fast to the football. And I just felt like in terms of the side of the ball that brought it, Seattle's DBs showed you why that they're one of the better groups collectively in the NFL. And I think you also kind of saw how that front marries with the back end and how it was kind of always disrupting Sam. And because quite frankly, like when you look across at both defensive secondaries, I think there's a lot of similarities. But I think you see kind of just how Seattle's was a little bit more effective. The rush was a little bit more effective for Seattle. And as a result, the defense was a little bit more efficient. And I think that to me was a little bit surprising. I thought the receivers for Washington would be able to be a little bit more effective in that matchup, but unfortunately they weren't. And that's something obviously we'll be able to tell as we watch more film and we're able to see, because there was a period of the game, I want to say it was like midway through the third quarter, where Mark Sanchez was like, oh, Sam just can't see the mid-level of the field. And if that's true, then that's something that, we got to look at and we got to tell you guys on Tuesday.
It does feel like there was pressure up the middle a lot. Like, we talked about with Larson and Paul, maybe the pocket's a little bit more stout. It did not feel that way today. And Sam did a good job of like moving around a little bit and finding some throwing. Like there was a couple plays where it felt like, and Sanchez, I think, did a pretty good job of highlighting this, where he'd be like, I know that guy's supposed to be there. And like the play to Logan Thomas is a great example, right? He's like, I know where this receiver is going to be. I can't see him. He's going to be here now. How do I slide around this end and then create a throwing lane? That way there is an angle for me to get the ball where it's supposed to be relatively on time. And you improvise, you adapt, you overcome. That's great, but also it'd be helpful if obviously the offensive line gave up a little less pressure and made life a little bit easier, or a lot easier for Sam.
That's something we'll be able to see a little bit more. But, like there's the Wiley pressure that he gives up to Boye Mafe on the Gibson touchdown, where Gibson kind of, he's running the corner on Bobby Wagner, and his arm and it looks like Sam's arm gets hit, or he's kind of falling away from the throw, and also I thought that, and again, this is high level and we got to watch more of this for Tuesday. But the other thing that really stuck out to me was I felt like they did a much better job, Seattle did, of being aggressive with the quick game stuff, like very aggressive at the line of scrimmage. And there's not an immediate place to go with the football. And that was challenging because that stuff's been there for him the past couple of weeks, and it's really elevated Sam and elevated his opportunities. And I just think you saw, we talked a lot about the team speed of Seattle and how that might be problematic. And I think you saw it be a little bit of an issue on some of the screens, on some of the runs. It looks like there's space, and, someone grabs a foot and then it ends up being a 2-yard gain. You're like, how did that happen? How did they close that space so much? And I think it was the same thing a little bit in the back end. So obviously that's something we got to check out. But I think that was probably the most disappointing thing, because like we both know that they're not going to run the football a ton. That's not who they want to be.
But can you run it a little bit more? Right? Like that's the thing that's killing me. It's just, I mean, even on the drive where they score the touchdown, right?
So dejected right there, bro.
It's just like, it just doesn't have to be. Here's the thing, right? We have data and we have analytics that tell you like passing is the way to score the football, or to score in the NFL, right? Like we know this, and there's going to always be a high level of desire to pass the football accordingly. And like he being EB comes from the Andy Reid, not just tree, but like from Andy Reid, who
directly.
Andy was one of the big guys starting in the late 90s to be like, we've got to pass the football and we can use screens and we can use quick game and all this stuff is extension of the running game. And like we can get some of the things that we like from the running game. But the whole history of the league also tells you that you do like teams that run the football a lot win. And it's not just like they're winning, so they run the football at the end to run out the clock. Like
that is part of it.
Some of the like statistically, sure. But like there are so many of the best teams that we've ever seen in this league. So many dominant teams. Every year when you look at the teams that are still around in January, like they can run the football, and they do. And the percentages might change. And I'm not advocating for like 50-50 here. I'm advocating for not 70-30. And I think that the problem is there is something that maybe eventually someone will figure out a formula for. And maybe like a Eugene Shen, hopefully for the Commander's sake, someone who is one of the best analytics people in the sport can somehow quantify this. But there is an impact on the defense that your offense has by being efficient and also just like, maybe this is like the personal trainer nerd in me, but there's like a rest to work ratio that we're talking about here. And you just need to bleed some of the clock. And because they're going, so inefficiently offensively in that second and third corner, there's an effect on the defense that it wears down and the clock is stopped. And then you go back and you have to play more and you wind up facing almost 70 plays. And there is just a complementary nature that is undeniable when you look at the league. And I don't think they have that. Not to mention the drive where they score with all the running back stuff. It's 4 runs, and then EB goes straight back to passes. And luckily it works out. They score, but it's like, dude, you just got like real chunk yardage. Where was that the rest of the game? They ultimately average 4.9 a carry. And even if you take away Sam's big scramble where he has the fumble, but he picks up yardage first, like you're still way over 4.5. So like they can do this. It is effective. It does help you. Just please do it like 4% more often, and I think that you would have a better chance of winning. That's my rant. That's my gripe. That's my frustration.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with what you said there. I go back to what we've talked about. We've talked about this before, and I just think they're not built for it. They're not designed for it. They don't invest the time in it. So it's hard for me to be like, yeah, do it more. And that's not who they are. And I understand you need to do it to a certain extent, obviously, because like of the stuff you're talking about. And it's interesting, like when you're calling a game, and I'm not calling it the same way that EB's calling it at this level, but when you're calling a game, it does stuff for you. It puts you in a better position offensively. It creates a consternation in safeties. It creates a consternation in linebackers. It creates conflict. And ultimately, as an offensive coordinator, that's what you're trying to do. And I understand EB does a great job of that with the passing game, the passing concepts, the motion, the sweeps, all that stuff. But it's just another layer. It's just another layer of decision and thinking that the defense needs to kind of contend with. And also the other thing is it versus good football teams versus a team like Seattle, if you can possess the ball. I'm a big believer in possessing the football, holding the football for long periods of time. Part of that is just being able to run the football effectively because you don't need your quarterback making these decisions down in and down out the way that sometimes happens when you're in this like 70-30 split. But I think the thing is EB, like you can just tell he doesn't, like at this moment, he doesn't have a great feel for like when and how to call this and intermix it with his vision of the offense. And that's going to take time. We've given Sam a lot of grace regarding kind of his development. And I think this is something that EB will get better at. We'll kind of have a better understanding for and improve it as he goes. Because like you see it kind of goes in this cyclical nature. Like he'll run the ball a little bit more. They'll be a little bit more efficient. Then he'll kind of get away from it. Because you can tell this is what he wants to do. This is where he first comfortable as a play caller. But he's the first-year play caller. This is his ninth game, 10th game, calling offensive, for Washington, where it's his show completely. So I think that's something that's important to understand. And I think as this season goes on, you'll probably see more of it. I think after the offseason, especially if he's still around, you'll probably see way more of it then still. But I think it's important that fans, you and I, we remember that that's not what he comes from. That's not what he understands as of right now. And I think he'll get better as we go. But it is frustrating because of the stuff that you're alluding to. Like, I'm with you. Like, it's not going to make you win football games, but it does. It shortens the game.
It helps you win football games. It's not going to make you win. Like, you still have to score in the passing game, but it will actually help you do that.
It can help you. It doesn't always help you. I think that's the thing. I think like that's the language that's kind of bothering me is it can help you. It's not a sure thing to help you. Like if it was assured to help you, you'd run the ball 30 times, you win the game. Like those would be your first 30 plays, right? We both understand that it's more layered and nuanced.
It's not about statistical accumulation of attempts. It's about the effect it has on the defense. And like, for instance, today, one of the things you can do against super, press coverage where your quick game's getting obliterated is, okay, well, we're going to throw over the top. Well, that doesn't really matter if your safeties are sitting deep to prevent that. How do you get the safeties to not sit so deep and open up some of those quick fade type of things that Terry McLaurin called for 3 weeks ago? Well, you run the football effectively. And like, so there's a schematic shift that happens when you run. And that's the thing, right? We've talked about this, and I think this is like the language that we agree on. You don't have to run the football. You have to have the threat of running the football. And so if you're effective with it, then the threat level is higher. But if the other team, even if you're effective at it, they don't believe you're actually going to do it, then that threat disappears, and thus the schematic advantage of a team being terrified of giving up 5 yards a carry is eliminated. And that's where I think that they have fallen short. Not to mention some of the personnel usage where like Chris Rodriguez was starting to roll 4 weeks ago, and he has been a ghost ever since. He showed up once on special teams with a sick play last week. Like he hasn't got a carry in like 3 weeks. And and 3 weeks ago we were like, is he the best back on the team? So it's just, I think the frustration for me, I'm not going to speak for anybody else, for fans, for whatever. The frustration for me is that there are things that have worked for this team this year, and they don't do those things. I know every schematic matchup's a little different. Your personnel shifts and changes. I understand every game is not the same. But what they're doing is not working, and are not working well enough, and it seems like there's plenty of room for optimization, and I would like to see them take those steps when they seem so readily obvious and available.
And I think that's something maybe we could talk about more on Tuesday. But you made me think what have they been doing? Because you said like what has worked for them in the past, and the thing that has really been probably the most effective in terms of their offensive production the last 2 weeks specifically is the quick game, right? Is the quick game, the screens like we talked about. Those were not effective today, right? They were less effective than they have been, right? And there were some opportunities. I think Logan Thomas did a great job with some underneath stuff, not true quick game, but there were some opportunities there, right?
Yeah.
And I think that has kind of, everyone said, the screen game is going to supplement the run game. The quick game the last 2 weeks has kind of been, in my estimation, the supplement for the run game. Yep. And so this is where having some flexibility as a play caller would be helpful, because obviously the quick game, like you said, not exactly where you want it to be. What else can we get to? And maybe draws, runs, whatever it looks like, right? But having another tool in the box to get there. And I think that's where kind of broadening the portfolio becomes an effective solution here for the offensive play caller, and potentially opens up. I think Seattle, when I look back at what they did today offensively, there were some times where they were having a tough go, and they were able to kind of shift. Oh, we're going to hit the play pass. That's going to be good for a couple plays. Oh, we're going to hit a couple runs. Oh, we're going to hit some quick game. We're going to hit some nice slants. And that flexibility to kind of bounce between these different offensive modalities really makes it challenging to play defense. And if you're efficient in all three of those things, or however many you want to kind of quantify here, it just makes it hard to play defense, because all of a sudden you're saying, we really got to make sure we have our coverage tilted toward DK. We got to make sure we're helping out Benjamin. And all of a sudden you get popped for 10 yards on 2 consecutive carries. It's like, well, we got to shift our coverage structure. Let's get in Cinco. You lose coverage guys in the back end. You create true one-on-ones, and they're able to kind of get out of that, get out of an offensive rut. And so I think that's maybe what I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just having another tool
that's exactly
in the box to say, hey, like we have quick game for the Giants. We had quick game for Philly. We had quick game for New England. It worked great. They said, okay, we're going to take away the quick game. We got long, athletic, fast corners. Let's take that away. What's the next thing to kind of adapt to that? And that can be really challenging in game, because offensively, talking with high-level offensive coordinators, you have a vision for how the game is going. You script your first 15. You all these things. You have a prediction. It doesn't go that way. What do I then adjust and adapt and then turn to? And so I think that'll be really interesting to watch on film this week to kind of see how that all played out.
Yeah. And sometimes you come out of this game being like, they did a terrible job. They didn't mix it up. And you go back and watch the tape. You're like, actually, they tried. But
they tried,
the run pass splits don't lie. That part we know. The question is why, and that is what the next podcast is for. All right, that's this podcast. We are done. Thank you so much for watching. If you have taken this in live with us at 9:45 p.m. Here on a Sunday night. Logan and I are going to go return to our families now, but make sure you're subscribed to Take Command in the podcast feed. You get the film breakdown coming up on Wednesday morning, and then the preview of the Giants. The good news is, Logan, the Giants are next. The bad news is this team has not had a good time with the Giants. They are 10-point favorites to open because the Giants are abysmal. So that's for later in the week. This is for now. We're done. Thanks for watching and listening to Take Command.